I tell stories, and I've been doing this for about 37 years now. That's me when about 3 decades ago. I was lucky that I was born in a family that told stories, master storytellers. My father was a documentary filmmaker. My mother was one of the first women news producers in the country with Doordarshan, and Pandey. So this meant that as a young child, I got to travel and see the country, and I fell in love with India. The amazing diversity that we had. Every single place, every few kilometers you go, it changed. But that is another story. The day my life changed, 11th of March 2010, my wife Ambika and I were blessed with our daughter, Gayatri. As I held her in my hands, I felt an emotion I'd never felt before. Tears of joy welled up in my eyes. I had this perfect human being in my arms. And the world around her was not so perfect. And I knew then that I had to do whatever I could to make it slightly better. But what could I do? All I do is tell stories. So I decided then that let me spend half my time telling stories that are meaningful, stories that add value, give people a voice that don't have a voice, people that inspire, stories that inspire people. But these don't get funded. So how do you take care of that? So what I did was I spent half my time doing commercially successful projects with television, documentary films, or corporate films, and I cross-subsidized all the money I got from that, the profit, back into meaningful content and stories. As a child, I loved TV, and stories on television were very interesting for me. But as a child growing up, we only had one format in the late 70s and early 80s, Doordarshan, black and white. And the problem with this was that we got to see what the state wanted us to see. Entertainment, news, a few hours a day. But that was soon to change. And soon in the 90s, we got cable and satellite television. It blew up. Every few years, every few months, you would have newer and newer channels. You had programming from across the world, stories coming to our shores from the West, from America. And one of those was Baywatch. And as a young teenager growing up in that time, it was aspirational for me. Hey, this spoke of a lifestyle of waking up to a hangover, of disposable morality, of living every day as it came, not worried about the consequences of my actions, but this wasn't me, and this wasn't who we are. And in fact, it wasn't what the Western American society was either. I think Americans are some of the most hardworking, God-fearing, family-centered people, just like any of us. That wasn't the case. And it was interesting, while me and my generation, we were waking up to hangovers, friends in the West were waking up to yoga, meditation, switching back to vegetarianism, veganism. The agricultural practices was going back to organic. It's ironic that a few decades ago, we were sold a story in India. How are we going to feed this growing population of hundreds of millions of people, now 1 billion plus? The only way was through petrochemical-based fertilizers, pesticides, and genetically modified seeds. But when you go down that path, and 5-6 decades later, what happens? There's a crisis in agriculture today. Farmer suicides are not unheard of across the country. But are there stories that can give answer to these guys? So we actually found something in Andhra Pradesh where 1 million farmers worked and went back to traditional farming. Narayan and his wife Narsiva, on 100 square meters of land, plant 7 varieties of crop, traditional Indian farming practices, not monoculture or one crop. And they're able to pull out enough money from this to sustain their own livelihoods. They're able to pull out enough vegetables to eat and sell about 4,000 rupees a month in the market. Now, contextually, you could rent a house in their village for 200 rupees. So 4,000 rupees goes a long way. If stories like that are able to give answers to farmers across the country, the crisis of agriculture, of cutting down 50% of the cost that is linked with these chemical-based pesticides and fertilizers to healthier alternatives in traditional farming practices, if they reach out to farmers across the country, would the crisis continue? Would farmer suicides continue? So stories can give answers. Stories also gives voice to the voiceless. I was fortunate to understudy with my uncle, Mike, and work with my cousin, Gautam, both master storytellers. Now, Mike's project and film On the Shores of Silence documented the slaughter of 1,200 whale sharks every year on the coast of Gujarat. Now, it's an interesting turning point. This was the first film that was actually able to bring about a law protecting a species, not only in India. Globally, the whale shark is protected because of this one film or story under CITES. But more interestingly, as Mike made this film, he reached out to the fishermen, the communities that were going out and killing these whale sharks. So while one year 1,200 whale sharks were killed, the very next year 0 were killed. So a story made a deep impact. So stories also give a voice to the voiceless, whale sharks in this case. Stories also inspire. So this is Lakshman Rao. He's a chaiwala in ITO, but he had a dream of being an author. So he wrote a book and he went to a publisher in Daryaganj. And the guys just like shunned him away. They saying, "You're a chaiwala. What do you know? What will you contribute to literature?" Anyways, he had a book inside. And thankfully, for all of us, he didn't sell short. So he went ahead and published his book under his own publishing house. Today, Lakshman Rao has 24 books. 13 have been published. 6 have been reprinted. Hell, he sells on Amazon. Now, as I was leaving, I asked him, I said, "Mr. Rao, why do you still sell tea? You're an author." So he said, "Arjun, in India, storytellers and authors don't get paid enough." Now the problem is there's good stories, there's bad stories, there's lots of stories. And over a short span of just a bit more than 2 decades, India now has 857 television channels. 460 of these are news channels. And sadly, negative news sells. So we've been bombarded constantly, again and again, with negative news, negative stories that fill the mindset. What happens when we do that? Walls start coming up where there were none. Society starts getting divided. Are we switching off from content? But not all of that is bad. We just heard Mr. Gupta talk about how, society joined in with that story of Nirbhaya, stood with her. The same happened with Jessica Lal. This was a turning point. NDTV, as a leading channel, took this up. My brother works there, and some of the content they've done, the stories they've done, have got illegal mining stopped or have fought against human trafficking. But in this case, it gave voice to someone who could not have a voice anymore. Someone who's gone. Her life taken away. But she got justice because a story worked. I think India, where we're born, and I feel really fortunate to be born here, I think we have so much going on. India, for me, is a living tapestry of colors, of different faith coming together, living in harmony. Every few kilometers you go, languages change, dialects change, food, amazing foods and colors, traditions, arts, culture. We have it all. And I think this needs to be preserved. Otherwise, we all lose out. So coming back, the future of technology. My daughter Gayatri is now 7, and my son Viraj is 20 months old. Interestingly, they learned how to swipe devices before they could walk. And they choose the content they want to watch. They're not interested in watching television because they can choose what they want, when they want, and where they want. They don't want to listen to what large media groups want to tell them, what the government wants to tell them, or what industrial lobbies and interests tell them. They are the YouTubers. And it's interesting, with YouTube, there's 300 hours of content that goes onto YouTube every minute of every day. It's massive. So what's happened is you've got a brilliant platform. Digital has provided us with a democracy, freedom of speech and expression. And as long as we can preserve that, those that don't have a voice will have a voice. 4 billion videos are viewed every day on YouTube, and this is just the beginning. My challenge to you all is this. I spend half my time telling meaningful stories. You all have these devices. The cliched cell phone is actually better in terms of quality than cameras and professional equipment were a few years ago, which costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. But that's gone. So you have the ability to tell stories. Why not be a voice for the voiceless? Like Anand was, it's a brilliant inspirational story there. Preserve culture and traditions and inspire others. I think we have a lot going on in India. There's stories at every corner. Stories of communities coming together in times of crisis and adversity. Different faiths living in harmony. It's not about divisive stuff, but we get that on television and main media. So I think that's the challenge I leave you all with. Until the next story, thank you.